In the world of the super-rich, some mistakes are bigger than others. For Millionaire CEO Donovan Sterling, his greatest mistake wasn't spilling a 2,800 bottle of wine at a 5-star restaurant. It was who he chose to blame. In front of a room full of gawking patrons, he decided to publicly humiliate his waitress, Maya Rodriguez, expecting her to crumble. Instead, her calm, devastating response brought his world to a screeching halt. Because Maya wasn't just a random waitress. She was a ghost from a past he thought he had buried, and her quest for justice was 25 years in the making. This is the story of how a single moment of cruelty ignited a firestorm that would burn an empire to the ground. The air in the Empyrean was thick with the scent of money. Not the crisp, clean scent of new bills, but the aged, complex aroma of generational wealth, a subtle perfume of truffle oil, expensive leather, and the quiet confidence of those who never had to look at a price tag. For Maya Rodriguez, it was the smell of survival. At 24, Maya moved through this world like a ghost. Her uniform, a stark black dress with a ridiculously small white apron, was her cloak of invisibility. By day, she was a second-year law student at Northgate University, buried under casebooks and fueled by cheap coffee and a burning private ambition. By night, she was just Miss or Waitress, or more often than not, nothing at all a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and cleared away the remnants of $1,000 meals. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but a tech conference in the city had filled every table with loud, self-important men in slightly too tight suits. Maya's feet throbbed in her sensible yet still inadequate shoes. She had an 8 a.m. torts class, a brief to finish on res ipsa loquitur, and a text from her mother's nursing home, pinging in her pocket, a reminder that the bill was due Friday. The pressure was a physical weight on her shoulders. "Miss..." The voice sliced through the dining room's refined hum. Maya turned her professional smile already forming. At table 7, the prime spot by the panoramic window overlooking the city lights, sat Donovan Sterling. Even seated, he radiated an intimidating aura. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of charcoal grey. His silver watch was worth more than her tuition, and his face was all sharp angles and bored arrogance. He was the kind of handsome that was more weapon than gift. He was the CEO of Sterling Innovations, a titan of the venture capital world, a man whose picture was frequently in magazines Maya couldn't afford. With him was a young woman, Tiffany, who looked less like a date and more like an accessory chosen to match the watch. "Yes, sir. How is everything?" Maya asked, her voice smooth and practiced. Donovan Sterling didn't look at her. He swirled the deep red liquid in his glass, a 2005 Chateau Margaux that cost more per bottle than Maya earned in a week. "This wine," he said, his voice a low, dismissive drawl. "It's not breathing properly. It's tight, stifled. Did you even decant it for the full 90 minutes I requested?" Maya's smile didn't falter, though a flicker of irritation sparked behind her eyes. She had decanted it herself precisely 90 minutes ago, just as he'd instructed the sommelier, in a tone that implied the staff were toddlers. "I did, sir. Exactly as you asked. Perhaps it just needs a few more moments in the glass." He finally lifted his gaze, and his eyes were cold, computational. It was a look that didn't see a person, just a malfunctioning appliance. "Don't make excuses, just do your job. For what this place charges, I expect perfection, not a few more moments." Tiffany giggled a high, tinkling sound. "Donnie, be nice." It was a token protest devoid of any actual concern for Maya. "I'm paying for a service, Tiffany. I expect it to be rendered correctly," he said, turning his attention back to his phone, which was buzzing incessantly on the table. He picked it up. his thumb swiping angrily at the screen. "Finch, what is it now?" "Did Pierce fold no?" "Then don't call me unless the building is on fire." He ended the call with a vicious tap and threw the phone onto the pristine white tablecloth. His movements were agitated, a stark contrast to his earlier bored demeanor. Something was clearly agitating him beyond the imagined suffocation of his wine. Maya knew to retreat. The cardinal rule of serving the ultra-rich was to become invisible when they were upset. "I'll let it breathe, sir," she murmured, backing away from the table. She continued her rounds, the weight of her mother's medical bills pressing down. Just get through the shift, Maya. Just get the tips. The tips from a table like Sterling's could cover the co-pay for her mother's medication. That thought was the only thing keeping her polite smile from cracking. 10 minutes later, as she was delivering a dessert platter to an adjacent table, disaster struck. Sterling, embroiled in another tense phone call, gestured wildly with his hand. His arm connected squarely with his wine glass. The Chateau Margaux, all $2,800 of it, arced through the air in a perfect, horrifying spray of dark crimson, drenching the white tablecloth, Tiffany's designer handbag, and the front of Donovan Sterling's immaculate grey suit. The entire section of the restaurant fell silent. Sterling stared at the stain blooming on his jacket like it was a mortal wound. He slowly lowered his phone. The cold arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a white-hot fury, and it was all directed at one person, Maya. She had been a good 5 feet away, but in his world, proximity was irrelevant. Blame was a missile, and he had already chosen his target. "You," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. He stood up, a towering figure of rage. "You clumsy, incompetent little girl! Look what you did!" Maya froze, her tray of profiteroles held steady by sheer force of will. "Sir, I was nowhere near your glass." "Don't lie to me," he roared, and now the entire restaurant was staring. Diners paused with forks halfway to their mouths. Waitstaff froze in their tracks. The manager, Mr. Henderson, began scurrying over from across the room, his face a mask of panic. "I saw you," Sterling shouted, pointing a finger at her. "You bumped the table when you walked past. You were careless." It was a blatant, outrageous lie. Everyone at the surrounding tables had seen him knock it over himself, but no one spoke. They just watched a captive audience to the public execution of a waitress's dignity. Tiffany dabbed at her purse with a napkin, looking mortified. "Donnie, please, it's okay." "It's not okay." He turned his glare back to Maya, his face twisted in a sneer. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs more than you make in a year? This wine. Your entire pathetic salary. But people like you, you have no concept of value, do you? You just drift through life, serving people who are actually important, hoping for a handout." Mr. Henderson arrived, wringing his hands. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I am so sorry. Please, whatever the damages, the restaurant will cover everything. Everything." Sterling waved him off like a fly. "I don't want your money, Henderson. I want competence. I want to enjoy a simple meal without it being ruined by some minimum-wage moron who can't even walk straight." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick, monogrammed wallet, and extracted a wad of cash, all $100 bills. He didn't count them. He just threw them. The bills fluttered through the air and landed at Maya's feet, a demeaning shower of green. "There!" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "That's probably more than you've ever seen in your life. A tip for your spectacular incompetence. Now get out of my sight before I have you fired." The silence in the room was absolute suffocating. Maya stood there, surrounded by the money, the stares, the judgment. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the stinging in her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to cry, to apologize, to do whatever it took to make it stop. The taunts brief her mother's bill, the ache in her feet, it all swirled into a vortex of humiliation. Mr. Henderson was already tugging at her arm, whispering frantically, "Come on, Maya, just go to the back. Apologize to the gentleman." But then something shifted inside Maya. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The years of swallowing insults, of smiling through condescension, of being invisible, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The law student, the one who read about justice and dignity and precedent, pushed the terrified waitress aside. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She looked down at the money scattered on the floor. Then she looked up past her trembling manager and met Donovan Sterling's furious gaze. She did not cry. Her voice, when it came out, was not a whisper. It was calm, measured, and carried across the silent room with the chilling precision of a judge delivering a verdict. "No," she said. Sterling blinked. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no." Maya repeated, her spine straightening. "You can keep your money, Mr. Sterling. It seems you need it more than I do." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. "You need it," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength, "to buy things that might give you the illusion of value. This suit, this wine, the sycophantic silence of everyone in this room who is too afraid of your wealth to point out that you and you alone knocked over your glass." She took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. "You talk about value, but you clearly don't understand the concept. My job, which you so casually dismiss, requires patience, grace under pressure, and the ability to treat people with a basic level of respect, qualities you have demonstrated you sorely lack." She gestured to the stain on his suit. "That stain is temporary. A good dry cleaner will remove it. But the stain on your character, that's permanent. No amount of money can clean away the ugliness of a man who builds himself up by tearing down someone he perceives as beneath him." She wasn't angry anymore. She was dissecting him. "You see, sir, you're not mad about the wine. You're mad about that phone call. That deal with Pierce that isn't going your way. You walked in here looking for a target for someone to absorb the force of your own failure. And you picked me. But you made a mistake. You assumed I was as cheap as the insult you threw at my feet." Donovan Sterling stood there utterly dumbfounded. His fury had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, slack-jawed silence. He had expected tears, apologies, groveling. He had not expected a lecture on morality from a waitress. He had been rendered speechless, stripped bare, in front of a room full of his peers. The power dynamic had been flipped so violently, it was like the world had turned upside down. Maya looked at him one last time, a hint of pity in her eyes. "I will not be picking up your money, and I won't be getting out of your sight. I'm quitting." She turned to her pale-faced manager. "Mr. Henderson, I apologize for this scene. You'll find my apron in the staff room. I am officially resigning, effective immediately." Without another glance at Sterling, his scattered money, or the shocked faces of the diners, Maya Rodriguez turned and walked away. Her head was held high, her back was straight, and for the first time all night, the ache in her feet was gone. She hadn't just quit a job. She had reclaimed herself. And in the stunned silence of the Empyrean, Donovan Sterling was left standing alone, with his rage, his spilled wine, and a humiliation far deeper than any stain on his suit. The moment Maya pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic warmth of the kitchen, the adrenaline that had fueled her defiance began to wane, replaced by a terrifying, stomach-churning dread. The clatter of pans and the shouts of chefs sounded distant, muffled. "What in God's name was that?" Mr. Henderson hissed, having finally caught up to her. His face was blotchy with panic. "Maya, do you have any idea what you've done?" That was Donovan Sterling. He could buy this entire city block and turn it into his personal parking lot. He'll ruin us. "He humiliated me, Mr. Henderson," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly now that she was out of the line of fire. "He threw money at my feet." "And you should have picked it up and said, 'Thank you,'" he retorted, his voice a frantic whisper. "That's the job we absorb. We appease. We apologize. We don't give them lectures on ethics." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "You're fired, Maya. Of course you're fired. You quit, you're fired, it doesn't matter. Just get your things and go. I have to go out there and perform a miracle of damage control." He scurried away, leaving her standing by the dishwashing station. The finality of it hit her. No job. No tips. Her mother's bill. A wave of nausea washed over her. She leaned against a stainless steel counter, taking deep breaths, trying to fight back the tears that had refused to fall in front of Sterling. She gathered her meager belongings from her locker, a worn copy of a constitutional law textbook, a half-eaten energy bar, and a framed photo of her and her mother from years ago, both of them smiling. As she walked out the back alley door, leaving the scent of truffle oil and shattered dignity behind, she felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. She had stood up for herself, but at what cost? As she stepped onto the street, a cool night breeze hitting her face, a voice called out, Miss Rodriguez." Maya turned. An elegant woman in her late 60s was walking toward her. She had been sitting at a table near Sterling's, a solo diner, who had been nursing a glass of tea and observing everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue dress and carried an air of quiet authority. "I'm Catherine Dubois," the woman said, offering a hand. Her handshake was firm. "I saw what happened in there. I just wanted to say that what you did took an immense amount of courage." Maya gave a weak, watery smile. "Thank you. It also cost me my job. Sometimes the things that are worth the most have the highest cost." Catherine replied, her eyes kind but perceptive. "I was a litigator for 30 years before I retired. I know a sharp legal mind when I see one, even when it's taking a dinner order. Your deconstruction of that man's character was as fine a closing argument as I've ever heard." Maya was taken aback. "You're a lawyer." "I was. Now I mostly sit on boards and try to stay out of trouble," she said with a wry smile. "Listen, that man Sterling, he's not the type to let an embarrassment like that go. He has a reputation for being vindictive. He might try to cause trouble for you." The thought sent a fresh chill of fear through Maya. What can he do? I was just a waitress. Men like that have long tentacles. They can make life difficult in ways you can't imagine, Catherine said seriously. She reached into her purse and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It just had her name, a phone number, and an email address. "If you find yourself in any trouble, or if you just need some advice, I want you to call me. No charge, of course. Consider it a professional courtesy." Maya stared at the card, a small, solid piece of hope in her trembling hand. I don't know what to say." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Catherine said. "Just be careful, Maya. You poked a dragon. Now you need to be prepared for it to breathe fire." With a final encouraging nod, Catherine Dubois walked away, disappearing into the city night. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse suite of his hotel, Donovan Sterling was not breathing fire. He was eerily calm. The rage had cooled and solidified into something much colder and more dangerous obsession. He had paid the bill at the Empyrean, leaving a tip so large it was insulting a final power move to assert his dominance over the flustered Mr. Henderson. But the victory felt hollow. The waitress's words echoed in his mind, picking at a part of him he kept buried deep. The stain on your character. A man who builds himself up by tearing down someone he perceives as beneath him. But it wasn't just her words. It was her face. As the initial humiliation faded, a nagging sense of familiarity had taken its place. He'd seen those eyes before. That same defiant stare, that quiet intensity. But where, Walter, he said into his phone, pacing the plush carpet of his suite. Walter Finch, his long-suffering chief counsel and fixer, answered on the first ring. "Sir, I need you to find someone." Donovan said, his voice flat. "A waitress at the Empyrean. Her name is Maya Rodriguez." There was a pause on the other end. "Rodriguez. May I ask the purpose, sir? Is this related to the incident Mr. Henderson called me about profusely apologizing for?" "It is precisely about that incident," Donovan clipped. "She publicly humiliated me. But there's more. She looked familiar. I want to know everything about her. Where she lives, where she goes to school, her family, her dog's name, her favorite color. Everything. I want a full workup on my desk by morning. Sir, with all due respect, perhaps it would be best to let this go. Pursuing a vendetta against a waitress could create negative optics, especially with the Pierce merger in its final stages." "Walter." Donovan interrupted his voice, dropping to a near whisper that was far more menacing than his earlier shouting. "Are you advising me, or are you questioning me?" "Just advising, sir." "Then advise yourself to do what I asked. I have a feeling about this, a bad one. Find her." He hung up and walked to the window, staring down at the sprawling city lights. The merger with Pierce Technologies was the biggest deal of his career, a legacy-defining move that would cement Sterling Innovations as the undisputed king of the tech world. It was a stressful, delicate negotiation, and Richard Pierce was a shark. That's why he'd been so on edge tonight. But this waitress, this Maya Rodriguez, it wasn't just about her insulting him. It was a loose thread, and Donovan Sterling hated loose threads. He had built his empire on control, on knowing every variable. An unknown variable like a defiant waitress with familiar eyes was unacceptable. He would find out who she was, and he would neutralize the threat. By 4 a.m., an encrypted email landed in Donovan's inbox. The subject line was simple: M. Rodriguez Preliminary Report. He opened it. It was mostly biographical data. Northgate University Law second year, top 15% of her class. Her mother, Elena Rodriguez, was in long-term care at a moderately priced facility for a chronic respiratory condition. No siblings. Address in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town. And then he saw it. The final line of the preliminary report. The detail that made the air freeze in his lungs. Father Miguel Rodriguez deceased. Occupation software engineer. Miguel Rodriguez. The name hit Donovan like a physical blow. Suddenly he was no longer in his penthouse suite. He was 25 years younger in a cramped, stuffy office, looking at a shy, brilliant man with kind eyes and a revolutionary idea. A man who had trusted him. A man he had destroyed. He stumbled back from the computer, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the picture of Maya included in the file. It was him. She had her father's eyes. The defiant waitress wasn't a random encounter. She was a ghost of the greatest sin he had ever committed, the dirty secret upon which his entire glittering empire was built. And she was a law student. The situation had just escalated from a personal vendetta to a 5-alarm fire. Maya Rodriguez wasn't just a threat to his pride. She was a threat to his entire existence. The story of Sterling Innovations was a modern business fairy tale. A brilliant young Donovan Sterling, armed with a visionary algorithm, had revolutionized data analysis, creating a predictive engine that became the gold standard in venture capital. It was the company's crown jewel, the proprietary Keystone algorithm, that gave them an almost psychic ability to pick winning investments. The official story was that Sterling had developed it in his dorm room, a stroke of solitary genius. The truth was much uglier, and it lay buried in the past with a man named Miguel Rodriguez. 25 years ago, Miguel was a software engineer with a mind like a diamond, faceted, brilliant, and capable of seeing patterns no one else could. He was also gentle, unassuming, and terrible at business. He had developed an algorithm in his spare time, a passion project. It was a beautiful piece of code that could analyze vast, disparate data sets and predict future trends with uncanny accuracy. He believed it could change the world. He pitched it to a handful of fledgling tech companies. Most didn't get it. But one young, hungry founder did. A charismatic, ruthless 20-something named Donovan Sterling. Sterling saw the algorithm's potential immediately. He praised Miguel, flattered him, and promised him a partnership. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that Miguel, in his trusting naivete, didn't have a lawyer review properly. Miguel handed over his research, his code, his genius. Weeks later, Donovan Sterling went dark. He stopped returning calls. When Miguel finally tracked him down, Sterling claimed the algorithm was flawed, unworkable. He said he was moving in a different direction. 6 months after that, Sterling Innovations launched, built on the back of the Keystone algorithm, Miguel's code slightly modified and rebranded. Miguel was devastated. He tried to fight it, but the NDA was ironclad in Sterling's favor, and he had no money for a protracted legal battle against a company that was already flush with an initial round of funding. The stress and the betrayal broke him. He lost his passion for coding, drifted between lesser jobs, and his health declined. He died of a heart attack a decade later, a brilliant mind extinguished by stolen potential. Maya had been only a child, but she remembered her father's sadness. She remembered the hushed, angry conversations between her parents. The name Sterling spat like a curse. After his death, her mother had told her the whole story, showing her the boxes of notes, the flowcharts, the early drafts of the code that her father had kept. He poured his soul into this measure. Her mother had said, her voice thick with grief. And that man, he stole it. He stole your father's soul. That story was the reason Maya was in law school. It was the fire in her belly, the purpose that pushed her through all-night study sessions. Her goal was never just to be a lawyer. It was to one day be a lawyer strong enough, smart enough, and powerful enough to right the wrong that had shattered her family. She hadn't recognized Donovan Sterling in the restaurant. She knew the name, of course, but he was older, harder, and she'd never seen a clear photo of him from that long ago. But after leaving the restaurant, after Catherine Dubois' card was safely in her pocket, she had gone home and Googled him. When the name Sterling Innovations flashed on her screen, a cold dread had washed over her. The man who had humiliated her was the same man who had destroyed her father. The cosmic cruelty of it was breathtaking. Now, sitting in her small apartment, with her best friend and roommate Chloe, the full weight of it was crashing down on her. "So you're telling me," Chloe said, wide-eyed, pacing the worn rug, "that the billionaire jerk you stood up to is the same guy who screwed over your dad?" "Yes," Maya whispered, holding her father's old leather-bound notebook. "It can't be a coincidence. It feels like fate, or a very sick joke." "This is insane," Chloe breathed. "This is like something out of a movie. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Maya admitted. "For years this has been a distant goal. One day I'll get justice. But now, he's real. He's right there. And he knows my name. A new, terrifying thought surfaced. Chloe, what if he figures it out? What if he connects me to my dad? How would he? It was 1,000,000 years ago. Rodriguez is a common name. But I have my dad's eyes, Maya said, a chill running down her spine. My mum always said so. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the university's financial aid office. Subject: urgent review of your scholarship status. Her heart dropped. She opened it. It was a generic-sounding email about a routine audit of her scholarship fund, requiring her to submit additional extensive documentation within 48 hours, or risk having her funding suspended pending review. No, she whispered. It's not a routine audit. Chloe read it over her shoulder. This is weird. They don't do this in the middle of a semester. And 48 hours. That's an impossible deadline. Maya's blood ran cold. Catherine Dubois. She warned me. She said he had long tentacles. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the first shot. Donovan Sterling hadn't just figured it out. He was already moving against her. He wasn't going to sue her for slander. He was going to quietly, systematically dismantle her life. He was going to cut off her education, the very tool she planned to use against him. Panic began to set in, hot and suffocating. He was too powerful. This was a hopeless fight. She was just a student with a dead father's notebook, and he was a titan with an army of lawyers and endless resources. Then she looked down at the business card on her table. Catherine Dubois. Sometimes the things that are worth the most have the highest cost, Catherine had said. Taking a shaky breath, Maya picked up her phone. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a student. She was Miguel Rodriguez's daughter. And this fight had started 25 years ago. It was time she started fighting back. She dialed the number. Catherine Dubois speaking. Ms. Dubois? Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. This is Maya Rodriguez. I think the dragon is breathing fire. There was a pause on the line, and then Catherine's voice came back calm and resolute. All right, Maya. Tell me everything. And I mean everything. Start from the beginning. Start with your father. The meeting took place not in a stuffy law office, but in the sun-drenched living room of Catherine Dubois' elegant brownstone. Over cups of jasmine tea, Maya laid out the entire story, her father's genius, his betrayal, the stolen algorithm, and now the thinly veiled threat to her scholarship. She brought her father's old notebooks, the pages filled with his neat, precise handwriting, complex flowcharts, and dated entries that chronicled the birth of his creation. Catherine listened with unwavering attention, her sharp eyes examining the notebooks, her expression a mixture of sympathy and strategic calculation. When Maya finished, Catherine sat back, tapping a thoughtful finger against her teacup. He's not just trying to punish you for the restaurant. Maya, she said, her voice firm. He's terrified. You're not just an angry waitress. You're the living embodiment of his original sin. The fact that you're a law student makes you an existential threat. This scholarship audit is just the first move in a campaign of intimidation. He wants to destabilize you, cut you off at the knees before you can even stand. So what do I do? Maya asked, feeling a sliver of hope ignite in the face of Catherine's calm competence. A lawsuit seems impossible. The NDA, the passage of time, we have no hard proof. A conventional lawsuit is a losing game, Catherine agreed. It would be tied up in court for years. He'd bleed you dry on legal fees. We can't fight him on his home turf, the courtroom. So we have to change the battlefield. Catherine stood and walked to her window, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street. Donovan Sterling has one vulnerability right now, the one thing that made him stressed enough to cause that scene in the first place. You mentioned his phone call, about a man named Pierce. Yes, Maya recalled. He said, "Did Pierce fold?" He was angry. That would be Richard Pierce, Catherine said, a glint in her eye. CEO of Pierce Technologies. He and Sterling have been rivals for years. I happen to know from a friend on the finance beat that they are in the final stages of a merger. A massive deal. Sterling is acquiring Pierce Technologies to become the undisputed market leader. The success of that deal, the entire valuation of his company, hinges on the perceived unique and proprietary nature of his keystone algorithm. A slow understanding dawned on Maya's face. The algorithm my father wrote. Exactly, Catherine said, turning back to face her. If Richard Pierce were to get even a hint that the core intellectual property of the company he's merging with is fraudulent, that it was stolen, the deal would collapse. Sterling's stock would plummet. It would be a catastrophe for him. So we tell Richard Pierce, Maya said, her heart starting to race. Not so fast, Catherine cautioned. Pierce is a shark. He's not going to take the word of an unknown law student over a fellow billionaire. He'll see it as a desperate ploy. We need more than just your story and your father's old notebooks. We need leverage. We need to fight Sterling's intimidation with our own quiet investigation. And so began a new clandestine phase of Maya's life. Guided by Catherine, she transformed. The frantic, stressed-out student became a focused, methodical investigator. They operated like a secret two-person law firm. First, they dealt with the scholarship. Catherine made one phone call to a friend on the university's board of trustees. The routine audit was mysteriously cancelled the next day. It was a small victory, but it was a crucial one. It showed Maya that power wasn't just about money. It was about knowledge and connections. It showed Sterling that she wasn't as alone as he thought. Donovan, furious that his initial gambit had failed, escalated. A private investigator began tailing Maya a man in a boring sedan who was comically unsubtle. Catherine taught Maya how to document it, take pictures of him, log his Times file a police report for harassment. They weren't just defending, they were building a case against him. Next, they dug into the past. Catherine hired a digital forensics expert, a white-hat hacker she trusted from her litigation days. His job was to analyze Miguel's old floppy disks and compare the foundational structure of his code, what little they could recover, with what was publicly known about Sterling's keystone algorithm. It wasn't a smoking gun, but the expert found striking similarities in the core logic, digital fingerprints that were too similar to be a coincidence. Maya, meanwhile, dove into legal research, not for her classes, but for her life. She researched intellectual property theft statutes of limitation and corporate fraud. She spent hours in the library, not just studying, but hunting for precedent, for a legal angle they might have missed. During this time, Donovan Sterling was growing more and more paranoid. The quick, clean neutralization he'd planned had failed. The Waitress had a protector. His PI reported that Maya was meeting with Catherine Dubois, a retired legal heavyweight whose reputation he knew well. This was no longer a simple cleanup. This was a war. The pressure of the Pierce merger was immense. Richard Pierce was a meticulous, detail-oriented negotiator, and his due diligence team was crawling all over Sterling Innovations' finances and operations. The deal was his crowning achievement, but it was also his greatest vulnerability. Catherine decided it was time to make their move. "We have enough now," she told Maya one evening, spreading their collected evidence on her dining table. "We have your testimony, your father's notebooks, the digital forensics report, and the documentation of Sterling's harassment campaign. It's not enough to win in court, but it might be enough to plant a seed of doubt in the mind of a shark. "You want me to meet with Richard Pierce?" Maya asked, her stomach twisting into a knot. "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "He's the only person in the world who can hold Sterling accountable right now. He has the power, and more importantly, he has the motivation. Ruining Sterling would be a bonus for him, but saving himself from a fraudulent deal is the prime directive. We just have to give him the reason to look deeper." Securing the meeting was a challenge, but Catherine's name still opened doors. She called Pierce's chief counsel, an old acquaintance, and pitched a meeting on a matter of urgent and confidential due diligence regarding the Sterling merger. She was intentionally vague, but the gravity in her tone was enough. They were given 10 minutes. "He'll be skeptical," Catherine warned Maya as they prepared. "He'll be arrogant. He will see you a young woman, and he will be dismissive. Don't let him. You are not a victim asking for a favor. You are a strategist presenting crucial intelligence. Be calm. Be factual. Let the story do the work. Remember who you are, Maya. You are not the waitress he might see. You are Miguel Rodriguez's daughter, and you are my colleague." As Maya put on the simple professional dark grey suit Catherine had helped her pick out, she looked at her reflection. She saw a glimmer of the woman she was becoming, not just a student, not just a daughter seeking revenge, but a formidable force in her own right. She was walking into the lion's den, not with a weapon, but with something far more powerful, the truth. The address they were given was not merely an office building. It was a steel and glass monument to predatory capitalism. The Pierce Technologies Tower clawed at the sky, so tall that its upper floors seemed to dissolve into the clouds. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and unnerving silence, where the only sounds were the funereal chime of the elevator and the soft, respectful footsteps of people who knew they were walking in the orbit of immense power. For Maya, it felt like entering a different country, one where she didn't speak the language. She instinctively smoothed down the front of her simple grey suit, a silent prayer that she looked the part Catherine had cast for her, a professional, not a supplicant. "Breathe, Maya," Catherine said in a low, steady voice as they ascended in the silent, high-speed elevator. "Remember, he needs us more than we need him. We're offering him a shield. Never forget that." The elevator opened directly into a reception area that was more art gallery than office. A single severe-looking assistant led them through a set of frosted glass doors and into the corner office. It was a space designed to intimidate. The furniture was sparse and brutally modern. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city sprawling below. Behind a black granite desk, the size of a small boat, sat Richard Pierce. He was exactly as Catherine had described, lean, hungry, and radiating an aura of impatient intelligence. He was on a call, his voice, a series of clipped, decisive commands. He gestured for them to sit without looking at them, making them wait while he concluded his business. It was a deliberate, calculated power play, designed to remind them of their place. Maya felt a familiar flicker of the humiliation from the Empyrean, but she crushed it, replacing it with cold resolve. She was not a waitress here. "All right," Pierce finally said, ending his call and swiveling his chair to face them. His eyes, the color of slate, scanned Catherine with a flicker of professional respect before landing on Maya with an undisguised skepticism. "Ms. Dubois, you mentioned a matter of urgent due diligence. My schedule is compressed, so let's be efficient. You have 10 minutes. He glanced at his watch, a slim platinum piece that was a study in understated wealth. Catherine gave a serene nod. "Thank you, Richard. The matter is indeed urgent. My associate Maya Rodriguez has prepared the briefing." All the air seemed to leave Maya's lungs for a second. It was her stage. She met Pierce's dismissive gaze, her own eyes steady. She would not be rushed. She would not be intimidated. "Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice perfectly even, "this isn't about a minor discrepancy in a balance sheet. This concerns the entire foundational asset of the company you are about to acquire. It concerns the origin story of the Keystone algorithm." Pierce's expression remained impassive, but his focus sharpened. The slight, bored tilt of his head disappeared. He leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "I'm listening." Maya didn't start with the theft. She started with the genius. She painted a picture of her father, Miguel Rodriguez, not as a victim, but as a visionary. 25 years ago, a software engineer working late nights in his garage saw the future. He believed that data, if you could only teach a machine to listen to its echoes, could tell you what was coming next. He called his creation Echo. It was a predictive engine of unparalleled elegance. She walked him through the story, her voice a calm narrative force. She described the notebooks filled with elegant code, the excitement, the hope. She detailed the meetings with a young, ambitious Donovan Sterling, portraying him as a man who recognized genius but lacked it himself. She recounted the promises of a partnership, the handover of the research, and then the sudden chilling silence. Pierce interrupted her, once his voice sharp as broken glass. "That's a compelling story, Miss Rodriguez, but stories are not evidence. Sterling's narrative is a cornerstone of tech law." "A story is all it is," Maya countered without missing a beat. "A carefully constructed piece of corporate mythology. I have my father's story, but I also have his work." This was the moment. She reached into her briefcase and retrieved a slim, professional-looking file folder. She placed it on the vast granite desk and pushed it forward. The slide of the folder across the polished stone was the only sound in the room. "In that folder," she said, her voice now holding the precision of a legal argument, "you will find 3 things. First, scanned copies of my father's original design notebooks. You'll note the dates on the pages, all of which predate the incorporation of Sterling Innovations by over a year. Second, you will find a preliminary report from a digital forensics expert who analyzed recovered code from my father's archived disks. He found significant structural and logical homologies, digital fingerprints. He calls them to the known architecture of the Keystone algorithm. The similarities are too profound to be coincidental. And third, she paused, letting her eyes lock with his. You will find a detailed log complete with photographs of a harassment campaign waged against me by a private investigator. A campaign that Mr. Sterling initiated one day after a public encounter where he learned my full name and therefore my connection to the man whose life's work he stole. She leaned back in her chair. We are not here to ask you to torpedo your deal out of the goodness of your heart, Mr. Pierce. We are here to provide you with critical intelligence. Intelligence that suggests your due diligence is fundamentally flawed and that you are about to pay billions of dollars for an asset whose ownership is at best disputed and at worst entirely fraudulent. Richard Pierce stared at the folder. Then he looked at Maya, and for the first time, the skepticism in his eyes was gone, replaced by the cold, clear light of calculation. This was a language he understood perfectly, risk leverage fraud. He slowly opened the folder and began to read. The silence stretched for minutes. He wasn't reading for story, he was scanning for facts, for dates, for liabilities. He was a shark that had just scented blood in the water, and he was trying to determine if it belonged to his enemy or if it was a trap. Finally, he closed the folder. He stood, walked to the immense window, and stared down at the city he ruled. I have always found Donovan Sterling's genius to be his talent for salesmanship, not innovation, he mused almost to himself. The story of the Keystone algorithm was always a bit too perfect, too clean, polished for the cover of magazines. He turned back, his decision made. This information is concerning. It requires further discreet investigation on my part. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. My team will be in touch if necessary. The meeting was over. They were dismissed. As they walked out, Maya felt a terrifying uncertainty. Had it been enough? The next 2 weeks were the longest of Maya's life. The silence from Pierce's camp was absolute. The PI who had been her shadow was gone. It was a strategic vacuum, a holding of breath before the storm. Maya went to class. She wrote her briefs. She called her mother. But her mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the meeting in Pierce's office. No news is good news, Catherine counseled her over the phone. A shark like Pierce doesn't move without certainty. He's doing his own digging. Be patient. Patience felt impossible. Every email notification made her jump. Every unknown number on her phone sent her heart into a gallop. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the call came. It wasn't to Maya, but to Catherine. It was from Richard Pierce's chief legal counsel. The tone was formal, devoid of emotion. A final meeting to conclude the merger discussions is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at our firm's offices. Mr. Sterling will be in attendance. We require your presence and that of your associate. The end game had begun. The law firm's main boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power. A single monolithic table of polished mahogany stretched down its length, surrounded by 20 chairs. The view of the skyline was even more spectacular than from Pierce's office. Donovan Sterling was already there, flanked by his lawyer, the perpetually nervous Walter Finch. Sterling was incandescently triumphant. He was smiling, laughing, shaking hands with one of Pierce's executives. He was a man on the absolute pinnacle of his career, about to close the deal that would make him a legend. Then he saw them. As Maya and Catherine were ushered into the room, Sterling's smile froze, then melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the large room. He wasn't speaking to them, but to Richard Pierce, who had just entered from a side door. "What are they doing here? This is a signatory meeting. Get them out." Richard Pierce calmly took his seat at the head of the table, his face a granite mask. "They are here as interested parties, Donovan. Please sit. We have much to discuss before anything is signed." The smug confidence vanished from Sterling's demeanor, replaced by a wary confusion. He shot a venomous glare at Maya as he reluctantly took his seat. The air in the room crackled with tension. "Donovan," Pierce began, his voice dangerously soft. "As part of our final due diligence, and prompted by certain information, we received my internal cybersecurity division, conducted a deep-level forensic audit into the provenance of the Keystone algorithm." Walter Finch began to look ill. Donovan sat bolt upright, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "We peeled back 25 years of digital history." Pierce continued, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "We analyzed server logs, recovered ghost data from early hard drives, and examined the very structure of the code itself. We found anomalies, vestigial code fragments that served no purpose in the current iteration, comment notations that had been scrubbed but were recoverable from archival backups. Most damningly, we found digital watermarks, unique author-specific patterns in the code's logic that point to a completely different authoring environment." Pierce leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Sterling's. an authoring environment whose digital signature we were after considerable effort able to match to the recovered data from a set of old floppy disks. Disks that belonged to an engineer named Miguel Rodriguez. The color drained from Donovan Sterling's face. He looked like he'd been shot. Pierce delivered the killing blow. The story Miss Rodriguez presented to me is in all its essential points true. The foundational code of your company, the engine of your entire success, is not yours. It was stolen. This is an outrageous fabrication. Walter Finch sputtered, rising slightly from his chair. A desperate shakedown. "Sit down, Walter," Pierce commanded without looking at him. Finch collapsed back into his seat as if his strings had been cut. Pierce's attention was solely on the man he had just broken. "The merger, it goes without saying, is terminated. But our problem now, Donovan, is one of disclosure. I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders. They will need to know why this deal, which was all but guaranteed, imploded. The news that Sterling Innovations is a technologically fraudulent enterprise built on a lie will be catastrophic for your stock value. Not to mention the interest the Securities and Exchange Commission will take in this matter." Checkmate. The room was utterly silent, save for Donovan Sterling's ragged breathing. His empire, his reputation, his entire life's work had been built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. He slumped in his chair, a man hollowed out, the arrogance and fury finally extinguished, leaving only the grey ash of defeat. His eyes, stripped of all their power, moved across the table and landed on Maya. He didn't see a strategist or a legal mind. He saw the ghost of Miguel Rodriguez, the face of his oldest sin, come back to claim its due. "What?" He rasped his voice, a dry, broken whisper. "Do you want?" Maya felt the eyes of every person in the room on her. This was the moment all the years of her father's sadness, her mother's grief, and her own relentless studying had led to. She paused, gathering the strength of a lifetime into a single point. "Revenge is beneath what my father deserved," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with absolute authority in the silent room. "What I want is justice." From her folder, she removed a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a complex legal document. It was a list. She slid it down the polished mahogany table. It came to a stop directly in front of Donovan Sterling. He stared down at the simple typed words which laid out the terms of his surrender. It was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. 1. Public acknowledgement. A formal public statement from Sterling Innovations naming Miguel Rodriguez as the original architect and sole creator of the algorithm. 2. The Miguel Rodriguez Foundation. The establishment of a foundation in her father's name to fund under-resourced young inventors seeded with a significant non-negotiable percentage of his personal fortune. 3. Restitution. A private settlement for Elena Rodriguez to ensure her lifelong comfort and care and the full funding of Maya's legal education. 4. Resignation, his immediate and permanent resignation as CEO of Sterling Innovations and from all other corporate boards. It was total. It was not just financial ruin. It was the public dismantling of his legacy and the simultaneous creation of her father's. He looked up, his eyes pleading for a brief moment, searching for an exit he knew wasn't there. He glanced at Pierce, who offered only a cold final stare. He looked at his lawyer, who looked down at the table in defeat. Finally, his gaze returned to Maya. In her eyes, he saw no hatred. He saw only the calm, unwavering certainty of a debt finally being paid. "I agree." Donovan Sterling said the words barely audible, and with that whisper, the Titan crumbled. And so the story doesn't end with a ruined CEO or a waitress who got her revenge. It ends with justice. Maya Rodriguez didn't just win a settlement, she rewrote history. She restored her father's name, turning his stolen legacy into a beacon of hope for future generations. She proved that power isn't just about money or status, but about conviction strategy and the courage to speak truth to arrogance. Her journey from the Empyrean to that final boardroom shows us that there are hidden strengths in all of us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It reminds us that a person's worth is never defined by their job title but by their character. What do you think was Maya's response? Justified? What would you have done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories that will stop you in your tracks. Thank you for watching.